Anna, you're off the load testing project. Kyle's more comfortable pushing limits than you are. Stephanie Winters laughed as she said it, standing in the doorway of my cubicle with her arms crossed. We need someone aggressive for this client demo. I looked up from my terminal, where I'd been reviewing the infrastructure specifications for the very system she was reassigning. Understood, I said. Nothing more. She turned on her heel, already talking into her phone about lunch reservations. I'm Anna Rhodes. 41 years old. I've spent 17 years at Tech Perfect Technologies, the last 9 as senior systems architect. I don't write the flashiest code. I don't give the most charismatic presentations. What I do is build systems that don't break, document everything, and understand every clause in every contract and policy document this company has ever issued. Stephanie had been hired as engineering director 8 months earlier. She came from a startup that got acquired, talked constantly about moving fast and breaking things, and seemed to believe that volume and competence were substitutes for actually knowing how distributed systems work under stress. I opened my email client and began drafting. The office around me continued its usual rhythm. Developers clustered around whiteboards, sketching out API designs. Project managers hurried past with printouts of Gantt charts. The espresso machine in the break room hissed and gurgled. Everyone was busy building things, shipping features, attending stand-ups. I was busy building something else. Insurance. 3 years earlier, I'd been called into a conference room by the VP of Engineering, Harold Fletcher. The company had just survived a catastrophic outage caused by inadequate load testing before a product launch. Fletcher was direct, we need safeguards. You understand the systems better than anyone. Help me build something that prevents this from happening again. Over the following 6 months, I worked with Harold and legal to create a framework. We embedded technical review requirements into project protocols. We established documentation standards. We created a tiered authority system where certain engineers, based on experience and domain knowledge, had veto power over deployments and stress tests that could impact customer-facing infrastructure. The framework wasn't flashy. It didn't get announced at all-hands meetings. It was just policy, buried in operational documentation and employment contracts. Most people never read it. I did. I always read everything. When Harold retired and Stephanie took over, she spent her first weeks redesigning the office layout and implementing new meeting structures. She never bothered reviewing the technical governance documentation. She held a town hall where she talked about empowering teams to move at startup speed and removing legacy bottlenecks. I sat in the back row and took notes. I watched as she brought in Kyle, someone she'd worked with at her previous company. He was talented but reckless. He optimized for speed and spectacle. He'd once brought down a staging environment for 6 hours because he didn't believe in gradual rollouts. Stephanie called it bold experimentation. I called it a liability. The current project was a demonstration for Halcyon Industries, a Fortune 500 logistics company considering a major platform migration to our infrastructure. The contract specified that our systems needed to handle sustained load at 150% of their projected peak traffic without degradation. If we failed to demonstrate this capability, we'd owe them $200,000 in milestone penalties and likely lose the contract entirely. The total contract value was $8 million over 3 years. Losing it would trigger layoffs. I'd seen the executive budget presentations. This wasn't just another deal. This was the revenue anchor for the next fiscal year. I'd designed the architecture for this exact requirement. I'd spent 4 months working with their technical team to understand their traffic patterns, their peak load characteristics, their failover requirements. I'd specified the database sharding approach, the caching layers, the circuit breakers. I'd documented the safe testing parameters in a 40-page technical specification that included detailed runbooks for every failure scenario I could anticipate. And now Stephanie had assigned someone else to stress test my work. I returned to my draft email. The subject line read, Load Testing Review Request, Halcyon Industries Infrastructure. The body was simple. I referenced the Technical Standards Manual section. I noted my designated reviewer status. I requested that all testing parameters be submitted to me for approval before execution, per policy. I copied Harold Fletcher, who still consulted part-time, and Carolyn Hughes, the VP of Legal. I sent it at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Stephanie replied within 20 minutes. Anna, appreciate the diligence, but we're on a tight timeline. Kyle has this covered. Let's not slow things down with bureaucracy. I replied with a single line, the policy isn't optional. See attached sections from the Technical Standards Manual and my contract addendum. I included screenshots of both documents, with the relevant passages highlighted in yellow. She didn't respond. I knew what she was doing. She was checking with her own contacts, trying to figure out if I was bluffing or if these documents actually meant what they said. She was probably calling HR, asking if employment contract provisions could really give an individual engineer veto authority over project decisions. She was learning that sometimes the quiet person in the corner has more structural power than the person with the impressive title. That evening, I received a message from Carolyn Hughes. Anna, I reviewed the documentation you cited. You're correct about the review requirement. I've informed Stephanie. Let me know if you need anything else. Short, professional, definitive. Carolyn didn't waste words. She also didn't appreciate when people ignored documented company policy, especially policy that existed to prevent legal exposure. I didn't hear from Stephanie the next day. According to the project channel on our team messaging platform, Kyle was making great progress and pushing the boundaries of what the system can handle. Someone posted a screenshot of a monitoring dashboard showing traffic at 200% of baseline. 3 people reacted with fire emojis. I felt my jaw tighten. I pulled up the monitoring dashboards I had access to. I didn't have permissions to stop the tests remotely, but I could watch. The load patterns I saw made my stomach tighten. He was ramping up traffic in aggressive vertical spikes rather than gradual increments. He was hammering specific API endpoints without distributing requests across the documented load-balanced clusters. He was ignoring the warm-up phases I'd specified for cache population. Worse, he was testing against the production database cluster, not the isolated testing environment I'd set up specifically for this purpose. That meant every query he fired was consuming connection pool resources that actual customer traffic might need. I documented everything with screenshots and timestamps. I sent another email to Stephanie, Harold, and Carolyn. Ongoing testing appears to violate approved parameters. Requesting immediate halt pending review. I attached a 3-page analysis showing exactly which protocols were being violated and what the likely consequences would be. Stephanie's response came an hour later. Anna, you're being overly cautious. Kyle knows what he's doing. The demo is in 3 days. We need to validate performance, not tiptoe around it. I saved that email in a folder labeled CYA documentation. Cover your assumptions. Or the other acronym, depending on how things played out. The next morning, Wednesday, I arrived at the office at 7. The parking lot was nearly empty. The building's HVAC system was still in night mode, making the air slightly stale and cool. I liked these early hours. Fewer distractions. More time to think. The monitoring dashboard showed that Kyle had run tests until nearly midnight. Several metrics were concerning: cache hit rates below 50%, database connection pools exhausted multiple times, memory utilization spiking above 90% on 6 application servers. I pulled the detailed logs. What I found was worse than I'd expected. He'd triggered 3 separate circuit breaker activations, which meant the system had detected cascading failures and automatically shut down certain pathways to prevent total collapse. Those circuit breakers were supposed to be emergency safeguards, not things you hit during routine testing. I compiled a report. I included graphs showing the memory leak patterns that suggested Kyle's test scripts weren't properly closing database connections. I highlighted the cache invalidation storms that occurred when he suddenly shifted traffic patterns without allowing the system to stabilize. I documented the moments when response time spiked from 50 milliseconds to over 3 seconds, which would have violated our performance SLA with Halcyon by a factor of 30. I attached it to an email with the subject line, Critical Risk Assessment, Load Testing Violations. I sent it to Stephanie, Harold, Carolyn, and added Jeffrey Lang, the Chief Technology Officer. Jeffrey rarely involved himself in operational details. He was a strategic thinker who spent most of his time with customers and investors. But he cared deeply about contract compliance and customer relationships. He'd built this company over 15 years from a 6-person consulting shop to a 200-employee platform provider. He understood that reputation was everything. Jeffrey responded within 30 minutes. Anna, let's discuss this. My office, 10 a.m. I brought printed copies of everything: the technical standards manual excerpts, my contract provisions, the monitoring data, Kyle's testing approach versus my documented specifications, and the halcyon contract with the penalty clauses highlighted in red ink. Jeffrey's office was on the top floor, corner position with windows overlooking the city. His desk was oak, old-fashioned, covered with neat stacks of paper. He preferred printed documents to screens. He believed you caught details better on paper. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Show me. I laid out the documents in order. I walked him through the governance framework, explaining how it was created and why. I showed him the testing violations, translating the technical metrics into business consequences. I opened the halcyon contract to page 17 and read aloud the penalty provisions. Jeffrey listened without interrupting. He was in his mid-50s, methodical, and allergic to unnecessary risk. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked out the window for a long moment. Has Stephanie seen all of this? He asked. Yes. She believes I'm being overly cautious. He nodded slowly. Your contract provisions are clear. The technical standards manual is company policy. If we violate our own governance structure and something goes wrong with a client this size, we're exposed legally and financially. He paused. I'm calling an emergency technical review meeting for tomorrow morning. You, Stephanie, Kyle, Harold, Carolyn, and myself. We'll determine whether the testing proceeds and under what conditions. I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph. Just relief that the process was working as intended. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me. You're doing your job. That's what we pay you for. I spent the rest of Wednesday preparing. I created a presentation that walked through the testing methodology Kyle had used, compared it point by point to the approved specifications, and projected the likely failure modes if he continued. I included specific technical details, thread pool exhaustion patterns, database query timeout cascades, and memory leak indicators in the application logs. I also pulled the incident reports from the outage 3 years earlier, the one that had led to the creation of the governance framework in the first place. The parallels were unmistakable. That outage had been caused by a developer running aggressive performance tests without understanding the downstream dependencies. The cascading failures had taken down customer-facing services for 4 hours. We'd lost 2 clients and paid out $60,000 in SLA penalties. I wasn't going to let history repeat itself. I rehearsed the presentation 3 times that evening in my apartment, speaking to my cat and adjusting slides until the narrative flow felt inevitable. Every claim needed evidence. Every criticism needed to be backed by data. This wasn't about personality or preference. This was about engineering reality versus wishful thinking. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully: charcoal blazer, white blouse, minimal jewelry. Professional armor. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the large conference room on the executive floor, the one with the long mahogany table and leather chairs. I arrived 15 minutes early with my laptop and printed materials. I set up the projector, tested the connection, and arranged my documents in the order I'd present them. Harold Fletcher came in next, carrying a coffee and a leather portfolio. He was 63, retired from full-time work but still consulting 20 hours a week because he couldn't quite let go. Anna, he said, shaking my hand. Good to see you standing your ground. You taught me to build structures that would outlast individual decisions, I said. He smiled. I taught you to document everything. You taught yourself the rest. Carolyn Hughes arrived with one of her associates, a younger attorney named Owen Cross. They took seats on the opposite side of the table, legal representation making their presence felt without needing to dominate the conversation. Jeffrey Lang entered at exactly 9, followed by Stephanie and Kyle. Stephanie's expression was tight, controlled. She wore a navy suit and had her tablet in hand. Kyle looked confused about why he was there, glancing between Stephanie and me like he was trying to figure out the power dynamics. Jeffrey sat at the head of the table. Let's be efficient. Anna, you've raised concerns about the load testing approach for the Halcyon project. You've cited policy violations. Stephanie, you've indicated confidence in the current approach. We're here to make a determination based on the facts and our contractual obligations. He gestured to me. Anna, walk us through it. I opened my presentation on the room's display screen. The title slide was simple: Technical Review, Halcyon Load Testing Protocol Compliance. I started with the Technical Standards Manual provisions, reading the relevant sections aloud. I showed my contract addendum that designated me as a mandatory reviewer for infrastructure stress testing. I displayed the email chain where I'd invoked this authority and Stephanie's response dismissing it as bureaucracy. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know about any of this," he muttered. "That's a process failure we'll address," Jeffrey said, his tone making clear who bore responsibility for that failure. I moved to the technical analysis. I displayed the monitoring graphs, highlighting the dangerous patterns. I explained why vertical spike testing without proper warm-up phases would lead to cascading failures in a production environment. I showed the cache population rates and explained how Kyle's approach guaranteed cold start penalties that would violate our performance commitments. "Here's what happens," I said, advancing to a slide showing a timeline. At minute 8, the cache hit rate drops below 60% because the system hasn't had time to populate frequently accessed data. Database query volume increases by 240%. At minute 11, connection pools exhaust. New requests start queuing. At minute 13, queue depth exceeds threshold and circuit breakers activate. User-facing errors begin. By minute 15, we're in cascading failure mode. Stephanie interrupted. "This is overly conservative. Kyle's approach is industry standard for identifying breaking points." I turned to her. "It's standard for controlled lab environments, not for systems that will face customer traffic during a contractually binding demonstration. If we replicate this testing pattern during the live demo with Halcyon executives watching, we'll breach the performance guarantee within the first 15 minutes. Harold spoke up. "Anna, what's the probability of failure if testing continues as is?" "Above 70%, I said. "And that's a conservative estimate. It assumes Kyle catches the warning signs and backs off before complete collapse. Given his testing patterns so far, he's more likely to interpret initial slowdowns as something to push through rather than warning signs." I pulled up another slide showing the 3 circuit breaker activations from Tuesday night. These are automatic emergency shutoffs. The system detected failure conditions and protected itself. In a live demo environment, these would manifest as error messages on screen in front of the client. Jeffrey turned to Kyle. "Do you dispute this analysis?" Kyle hesitated. "I mean, I was pushing the system hard to find its limits. That's the point of load testing, right? You want to know where it breaks." "Did you review the technical standards manual before beginning?" Jeffrey asked. "No, I didn't know it existed." Jeffrey's jaw tightened. He looked at Stephanie. "Did you ensure Kyle was aware of our testing governance policies before assigning him to this project?" Stephanie's confidence wavered. "I trusted his technical judgment. He has experience with high-load systems from our previous company." "That's not what I asked," Jeffrey said, his voice quiet but sharp. "Our policies exist for a reason. They're not suggestions. Did you review them before making this assignment?" The silence stretched for 3 seconds. "No," Stephanie admitted. Carolyn Hughes leaned forward. "For the record, the Technical Standards Manual has been company policy since March 2022. It was distributed to all engineering leadership at that time and is available in the company policy repository. Violation of these protocols exposes us to significant contractual and operational risk. Anna's review authority is explicitly documented and legally binding under her employment terms, which were amended in July 2023 to reflect her role in creating the governance framework." She slid a document across the table to Jeffrey. "I prepared a summary of the relevant contract provisions and penalty exposures. If we proceed with the demonstration using the current testing approach and experience the failures Anna has outlined, we're liable for the $200,000 milestone penalty and likely breach of the entire contract. Additionally, if the failure impacts their production traffic during the migration window, we could face additional damages." Jeffrey studied the document. "What's the total exposure? Worst case? North of $3 million if we factor in lost contract value and potential consequential damages." The number hung in the air. Jeffrey looked at me. "Recommendation, Anna? Halt all testing immediately. I'll personally design a revised testing protocol that validates system performance within safe parameters. The methodology I'll use involves graduated load increases with stabilization periods, proper cache warm-up sequences, and isolated test environments that don't risk production resources. We can complete comprehensive validation in 48 hours. The demo will proceed on schedule, but with an approach that won't jeopardize the contract. Time required? Jeffrey asked. 48 hours of testing. I'll need Kyle's assistance executing the test scenarios, but I'll design the parameters and monitor the results personally. Stephanie? Jeffrey asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her tablet sat unused in front of her. If that's the determination, I'll support it. It is, Jeffrey said. Anna, you're the technical lead on this project, effective immediately. Kyle, you'll support her as directed. Stephanie, we'll discuss your oversight responsibilities separately. Harold, I'd appreciate if you could provide consultative support to ensure we're following best practices. Carolyn, please prepare documentation of this decision and the rationale. He stood, which signaled the meeting's end. We have a substantial contract at stake. We're going to honor our governance processes and deliver what we promised. Meeting adjourned. The room cleared quickly. Kyle approached me hesitantly. I'm sorry. I really didn't know about the policies. I believe you, I said. But that's why they need to be followed. Systems thinking isn't about trusting individual judgment. It's about creating structures that work regardless of who's executing them. He nodded. Can I ask you something? How did you know it would fail at minute 15? Because I've seen it fail before. Different system, same pattern. Experience isn't about being smarter. It's about having already made the mistakes or watched someone else make them. I spent the next 2 days rebuilding the testing plan from scratch. I started by creating an isolated test environment that mirrored production but used separate database instances and application servers. No risk of impacting actual customer traffic. Then I designed the load profile. Instead of Kyle's aggressive vertical spikes, I used a graduated approach. Start at 20% of expected peak load and hold for 15 minutes. Monitor all metrics, response times, cache hit rates, database query patterns, memory utilization, CPU usage, network throughput. Only when everything stabilized at healthy levels would I increase load by another 5%. Kyle assisted, quietly this time. He watched how I worked, asked good questions, and admitted he'd never seen load testing approached with this level of methodical care. At my last company, we just threw traffic at systems until they fell over, then fixed whatever broke. That works fine until you're doing it in front of a client who's about to give you $8 million, I said. Then it becomes a very expensive learning experience. We ran through the scenarios systematically. 20% load, 15-minute stabilization. 25%, another 15 minutes. At each level, I checked the cache population, verified that database connection pools were being properly recycled, confirmed that memory wasn't leaking. By Friday evening, we'd reached 100% of projected peak load. Every metric was green. Response times averaged 47 milliseconds. Cache hit rates held steady at 94%. The system was humming. Now we go to 150%, I said. This is what the contract requires. Sustained performance at 50% above peak load. Kyle looked nervous. What if something breaks? Then we find out now, in a controlled environment, with time to fix it. That's the entire point. I increased the load gradually. 110%. 120. 130. At each step, I watched the metrics like a surgeon monitoring vital signs. At 140%, I saw the first warning sign. Cache hit rate dropped to 88%. Not critical, but declining. I held the load steady and watched. After 8 minutes, the rate stabilized at 86%. The system was adapting, reallocating memory, optimizing query paths. I pushed to 150%. The response times climbed slightly, from 47 milliseconds to 63. Still well within our SLA commitment of 200 milliseconds. Database connection pools showed higher utilization, but they weren't exhausting. Circuit breakers remained inactive. I held the load for 30 minutes. Monitoring. Watching. Looking for any sign of degradation. Nothing broke. By Saturday afternoon, we'd validated the system up to 170% of projected peak load with 0 failures. Every metric was green. The infrastructure hummed along exactly as I'd designed it to. I documented everything in a final test report: methodologies used, load profiles tested, performance metrics achieved, confidence levels for the demonstration. Kyle read through it. "This is incredible. The system just absorbs everything." "The system does what it was designed to do," I said. "That's not incredible. That's engineering." Monday morning, the Halcyon Industries executives arrived for the demonstration. There were 5 of them: Frank Osborne, their CTO, 2 senior engineers, and 2 executives from their operations division. Jeffrey, Stephanie, and our sales team guided them to the observation room adjacent to our operations center. I sat at the primary engineering console with Kyle beside me. The observation room had a large window looking into our workspace and monitors displaying the same dashboards I was watching. Jeffrey made brief introductions, then turned the floor over to me. I walked them through what they were about to see. "We'll simulate your projected Black Friday traffic load, which represents your highest sustained demand period. The test will run for 30 minutes at 150% of that peak load. You'll see real-time metrics for response times, error rates, and system resource utilization." Frank Osborne nodded. "And if something fails?" "Then you'll see exactly how the system degrades and recovers. Our architecture includes multiple redundancy layers and automatic failover mechanisms. But based on our testing, we don't anticipate failures at this load level." I initiated the test sequence. Traffic began flowing into the system. The monitoring dashboard showed the load climbing: 10,000 requests per second, 15,000, 20,000. The numbers that would have terrified Kyle a week ago were now just expected metrics. Response times held steady. 52 milliseconds average. Database queries executed cleanly, connection pools cycling smoothly. Cache hit rates settled at 91%. Memory utilization climbed to 73%, then plateaued. The Halcyon engineers watched the metrics, occasionally asking questions about specific implementation details. I answered each one precisely, explaining the caching strategy, the database sharding approach, the circuit breaker thresholds. 15 minutes in, we were still green across every metric. 20 minutes. Still green. At 25 minutes, one of the Halcyon engineers pointed to a small spike in response times. "What was that?" I pulled up the detailed logs. "Garbage collection event on application server 3. The system automatically redistributed traffic to the other servers while memory was being cleaned up. Total impact: response times increased from 52 to 71 milliseconds for 18 seconds. Well within acceptable parameters." He nodded, impressed. At 30 minutes, I terminated the test. That concludes the demonstration. As you can see, the system handled 50% above your peak projected load with no degradation in service quality. Frank Osborne looked at Jeffrey. "This is exactly what we need. Stable, predictable, resilient." One of the operations executives asked, "What happens if load goes even higher? Say we have an unexpected viral marketing event?" I pulled up another dashboard. "We have automatic scaling policies that activate at 85% sustained load. Additional application servers spin up within 90 seconds. We've tested burst capacity up to 200% of baseline, though at that level you start seeing response times climb into the 150 millisecond range." "Still within SLA," Frank noted. "Correct." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, covering redundancy strategies, disaster recovery protocols, and monitoring capabilities. Every question received a detailed, documented answer. The contract was signed that afternoon in Jeffrey's office. $8 million over 3 years, with options for expansion. As the Halcyon executives left the building, Jeffrey pulled me aside. "Well executed. The system was already designed correctly," I said. "We just needed to validate it properly." "The system was designed correctly because you designed it," he said. "Don't undersell your work." Wednesday morning, Stephanie appeared at my desk. She looked like she hadn't slept well. Dark circles under her eyes, hair less carefully styled than usual. "Anna, I owe you an acknowledgement. You were right about the testing approach. I should have reviewed the governance documentation before making assignments." I met her eyes. "The documentation exists for a reason. We built it after painful lessons." She nodded. "Jeffrey and I had a long conversation. Going forward, all infrastructure projects will route through you for technical validation before execution. That's already the policy, I said. We just need to follow it. She left without another word. 2 weeks later, I learned through Harold that Stephanie had been placed on a performance improvement plan. The plan required her to complete comprehensive training on TechPerfect's technical governance framework, shadow Harold for 30 days to learn operational leadership practices, and demonstrate understanding of the company's risk management protocols before being allowed to make autonomous project assignments again. Kyle, to his credit, requested to be reassigned to my team permanently. I want to learn how to build systems the right way, he told me. Not just fast systems. Reliable ones. I approved the transfer. He had talent and, more importantly, he demonstrated the ability to learn from mistakes. That counted for more than raw technical skill. Over the following months, I worked with him on proper systems design. We built testing frameworks together. I showed him how to read performance metrics not just for current state but for trend analysis. I taught him that the goal wasn't to build systems that could handle expected load, but systems that degraded gracefully under unexpected conditions. He turned out to be an excellent student once someone gave him actual structure to learn from. The Halcyon project went live on schedule in mid-November. Their Black Friday traffic hit exactly the levels we'd projected. The platform handled it without incident. Response time stayed below 70 milliseconds even during peak hours. Zero downtime. Zero customer-facing errors. Their executive team sent a formal commendation letter to Jeffrey, specifically praising the infrastructure's reliability and the quality of technical leadership they'd observed during the evaluation process. I framed that letter and hung it in my cubicle, right next to my printed copy of the technical standards manual. 6 months after the incident, Stephanie left TechPerfect to take a position at a smaller firm as a VP of engineering. Her departure was announced as a mutual decision to pursue new opportunities that better aligned with her leadership style. Jeffrey promoted me to principal systems architect and gave me formal authority over all infrastructure decisions across engineering divisions. The promotion came with a salary increase and a new clause in my contract that explicitly protected my technical authority from being overridden by operational leadership. Jeffrey wanted to ensure that what happened with Stephanie couldn't happen again. I still work at the same desk. I still write documentation that most people don't read until they need it. I still attend meetings where louder voices try to override careful planning with aggressive timelines and promises of moving fast. But now, when someone suggests cutting corners or ignoring established protocols, I pull up the frameworks we built. I cite the sections. I reference the contracts. I show them what happens when you confuse recklessness with boldness. I also tell them about the Halcyon demonstration. About how proper testing and methodical validation won us an $8 million contract. About how following the boring, unglamorous processes actually delivered the spectacular result that aggressive corner cutting never could have.